at the back, can you stick your hands up if you can hear me okay? Well, welcome to this session. Hopefully you're here for a session which is entitled What You Need to Know to Manage Fire Safety and HRBs. If you're not here for anything else, now's the time to leave without making it too awkward when I get halfway through. So, my name's Russ Timpson. I'm the organiser of the Tall Buildings Fire Safety Network. I'm a chartered fire engineer and I'm also an ex-firefighter. And I've been involved in the management of many tall buildings, both commercial, mixed use and residential during my career. Can I just see by show of hands, how many people in the room manage fire safety in an HRB? So we've got about half a dozen people in the room who are actually doing that task. The other people, are you, if you could put your hands up, are you somebody that services and helps those people manage that? Are you a contractor, supplier, that kind of thing? Yep. Anybody else? So what are we going to cover in this session? I've got, I think, at least 30 minutes or 40 minutes, something like that. I don't know whether at the end of it we can do a Q&A session, but I'd be delighted if we can do. So what am I going to cover in this session? I'm going to look at some context first, and then perhaps look at some of the references that I find useful doing this thing. And then I want to talk about fire strategy. Hands up in the room of everybody who's clear on what a fire strategy is. Okay, so that's not everybody, and I'm assuming most people are involved in the fire industry, and it's true to say that it's a very misunderstood term. Just get a bit of a crackle back on this microphone. Then I'm going to be talking about checking assumptions. I don't know if are we going to change microphones? We are. Just bear with me 1 second.
Should be ready to go, but it's going to be a bit low. Start. Right, can I get that?
And then I'm going to make a case for embracing resilience and redundancy. By the way, how many people in the room heard my talk earlier on? Okay, so there's going to be a little bit of repetition. Now, we've been talking, if you turn on the TV at the moment, they're talking about the cost of living crisis, aren't they? And we're all now thinking about the cost of living. In our industry, as fire safety professionals, what is the cost of living? And I don't mean that day-to-day bill that you've got to pay. I'm talking about keeping people safe in their buildings. And I think we have to make a case in our industry for saying there is a cost of living. There is a cost for being safe in your building. And we can't do it at the absolute bottom budget that you can possibly afford. And why should we do that? And I'm going to try and talk about that. And I think we have to get involved as a collective in talking about the cost of living. Slightly different spin on that phrase. So the context for this then, no fire talk you've ever been to would be complete without a fire triangle, would it? This is my fire triangle for managing fire safety in an HRB. You've got to know what the design is. Now, quite a lot of managers in tall buildings don't necessarily come from a fire safety background. In fact, a lot of the people that I train generally come from an FM, facilities management background, security, engineering, construction. And this is one of only a small number of disciplines that they may be aware of. How well do you understand the design of your building? Now, the Building Safety Bill, as we know it, was going to have two particular focuses: the spread of fire and structural safety. Those of you that manage your building, do you know and understand how the footings are constructed on your building? Would you know intimately how the concrete is connected and how the floor plates are connected to the facade? I think you should know that. I'm not expecting you to be a civil engineer, but I'm expecting you to know the design. Because if you don't understand the fundamentals of the design, how can you possibly do your job? Construction. The people constructing the building have to understand the fire aspects of what they're constructing. And we can all tell stories of really bad installations that have taken place around the country when people involved in the construction or refurbishment don't actually construct the building properly. But above all, in my opinion, you can get these badly wrong. You can get the design wrong and you can build it wrong. But if you don't manage it, that's when it's going to be really an unsafe building. I've stayed in a Formula One hotel on the continent. That's a building with no staff in it at all. You check in with a credit card on the door, there's no staff in there at all. There's no management. I believe you can have a building which is not what you regard as fire safe, but if it's well managed, you've actually reduced the risk quite considerably. And that is why I fervently believe that this is a very retrograde step that we're about to do by dismantling all that work that was done after Grenfell. I don't want to get too political about this, but I think we do have to state an opinion as a body, as a fire safety profession. All of that work for all the working groups is now going to be unpicked, I predict, because of the cost of living crisis. Because it's all going to cost too much money. And we have to have a voice and say, hang on a minute, I'm going to come on to that a bit later on about actually what is it costing us for the next generation when we build no-frills housing with the minimum cost. Now, I showed this graph earlier on, and forgive me for those of you who've seen it earlier on. It's called Mind the Gap, and it's a simple graph to try and convey to colleagues about some assumptions that are being made. Now, hopefully I can get this right. This blue line here, this axis here is the fire safety status of the building, and this is the timeline for that building going forward. Now, when that building is built, one would assume and hope that it's been built in compliance with the building regulations that apply wherever you are, or the codes and standards that you've built that building to. And you can see here it's a steady state line. That's kind of an assumption. The building will be built to that. I can only tell you now, of all the clients I deal with, they think that building control are the arbiters that building is safe. How many people in the room think fundamentally it's down to building control to say that the building is safe? Hands up if you think fundamentally it's building control. Nobody. Wow, that's a shock. I stood on a platform with the head of the Building Control Alliance prior to Grenfell, and he said it's not our job to say this building is safe. It's our job to say a process has been followed. That's our job. That's building control's job. So anyway, we've got this level of fire safety. If you're in England and Wales, approved document B, and that's where the level of fire safety is. Now, the next line above it, the green line, that's the level of fire safety that your insurer would like you to have. Because they're insuring the building and they want to make sure that they don't have a bad debt. They don't gamble on fire safety. And as you can see, it's more than it is expressed in approved documents or in Scotland or Northern Ireland. The yellow line, in my opinion, is the perceived level of safety for the residents in the building. They actually think it's a lot safer than it is, in my opinion. By the way, this is based on my opinion and experience. Now, here's the catch. The red line at the bottom here is what I believe the actual fire safety status of that building is. And it doesn't match even the entry level here. It's somewhere down. And it degrades over time, especially when you do a refurbishment. Now, if this is an HRB and you are working on the principle of a stay-put strategy for that building, and you're not even meeting the designed level of safety in there, is stay put valid? Is it valid? And far too many people, I'm talking colleagues now, I'm a fire engineer, far too many people in this industry, in my opinion, certainly people that are close to the government and advising them, are absolutely wedded to this is the reality. And it's not. I believe, my opinion, is that that is the reality. Now, if that is the reality, you as fire safety managers or the managers in a tall building, we've got to accept that. We've got to mitigate it. We've got to overcome it. And we can't go on saying, well, actually, as you've seen by the way that certain guides have been withdrawn, etc., that is the status quo. That is not the status quo, in my opinion. That is the status quo. That's where we are. And the only way that we can really address that, I believe, is through management and an application of management principles, which is why that job is so critical. It's so important that we must have it, in my opinion. Fire statistics. And previously we were saying, well, there's no problem because we haven't got the level of deaths that would cause us to do a review of the approved documents, etc. Now, some of you may be from a health and safety background. You're familiar with a thing called Bird's Triangle. Bird's Triangle says that there's a numerical relationships between minor fires, serious fires, or incidents or accidents, and the major incident. Now, if we look at the number of incidents that are occurring across the country, in this country and abroad, and I would really commend you all to look outside the UK. We've not been doing it, and it's quite clear now. If you've watched most of the public inquiry, like I've watched, we're absolutely insular, and we're very parochial about the way we do stuff. We have to look at other countries and the way they do it. But there's been, and this slide is actually a little bit dated now. There's been 300 high-rise fires since Grenfell Tower. Now, if you accept this numerical connection, then we've got another potentially high consequence event out there somewhere. And the only way we're going to stop that is through management, I believe. We're having a very serious, fully engaged, tall building fire with a facade on fire in the world about once every 6 weeks at the moment. And we can catalogue those all around the world. And you may have seen some recently in China, in Milan, in Italy, etc. So, yes, this is a very low probability event. Fire is a low probability event. But it's different to all the other health and safety issues because it is a high consequence event. So some references that I use that help me to do this job. If you haven't seen it and you haven't used it, this is the output from Working Group 8 from Hackett. Is anybody familiar with this document? Hands up if you're familiar with this document. One or two of you. So the great and the good got together under the chairmanship of Anthony Taylor, and I'd like to recognise Anthony Taylor as doing a huge amount of work. He led Working Group 8 on fire safety management. And as you can see here, they came out with a competency framework for fire safety managers, and that's now been embodied in the Fire Safety Federation Guide for Fire Safety Managers, if you haven't seen that document yet. And that lays down some core competencies that you should have and must have to do this job. This has got some great information in it. So if you haven't seen this and you haven't used that document, I commend you to go and get it because it's got some great stuff in there, some great references. By the way, I'm assuming obviously that you're familiar with 999, 991, 9999, ADB, the LaCourse guide, and all of the other recognised guides. These are the ones outside of that I would commend you to go and have a look at if you're going to do this job. Second one then is this. Hands up who've seen this. High-rise residential buildings, serious incident scenarios. How many people have read that and seen that document? Wow. What a fantastic document this is. Long overdue. If you've not seen this, this is absolutely fantastic. It was commissioned by the Health and Safety Executive and ARUPS. It came out last year, and it lays down some scenarios to test your design with. So if you apply this to your buildings as a fire safety manager and ask yourself, will this building withstand this? So fire in a flat or a unit, fire in a balcony, dealing with unmanned changes, and so on and so forth. That document, which was also written by ARUPS, goes on to detail a lot of the kind of criteria that you should apply to your building to see whether it's fit for purpose. So again, I commend you, go and get this document and read through it. It's got some great stuff in it. And it'll help you, as a fire engineer, Some of you who are fire engineers will know Margaret Law, late of Arabs, and she designed the concept of a design fire. So generally we subject a design to a design fire, normally a number of megawatts, normally 5 megawatts, if you're familiar with this, and you test that on the design and will it withstand it. This is taking it to the next stage, and it's actually coming up with some specific scenarios. Will my building withstand this and still provide the facility for people to leave within a certain defined period of time? So if you haven't read it, I commend you to go and read it. Another oldie but a goldie, the Housing Health and Safety Rating System Operating Guidance that came out after Lacanau. How many people are aware of this and seen this document? If you go to section 11 there, 11 relevant matters in assessment, if you're doing fire risk assessments on HRBs, this is an absolutely fantastic checklist to go through and subject the design of the building to it, to say, have we thought about that? Have we got a management system in place that can deal with all those matters arising in that document? All of these, by the way, are downloadable. Just go onto the internet and Google them and you'll find them. An excellent document, an excellent reference to use on top of the accepted codes, standards and guides. Now, if you've got residents in the building, hands up if you're familiar with TPAS. Anybody in the room familiar with TPAS? Country's leading organisation on tenant engagement. So if you want to, as you should do under the proposed building safety bill, is you now need to develop a tenant engagement strategy. You need to find a way now that you're going to engage with the people in the building and bring them into the conversation, and that's all of them, including people necessarily that don't, from a different culture, different language, people with a disability, etc. They've produced, TPAS have produced National Tenant Engagement Standards, and I recommend it and commend it to you if you are in the place of developing a tenant engagement strategy. That's a great document to go to that gives you a framework for developing that. Because that's essential, especially in an HRB. You've got to get the people in the building on board. And you've got to develop a safety culture. Everybody familiar with when I say safety culture, what it means? Anybody in the room give me a definition of culture? I don't mean when you get a laboratory you grow stuff in a petri dish. Shall we try a little cultural experiment? Here's a little cultural experiment, okay? I'm going to call out a salary figure, right? And when I get to your salary, I want you to put your hand up in the air for me, all right? Okay, so you've already got that, and I'm going to go up in £5,000 increments, and when I get into your band, I want you to put your hand up nice and high for me, all right? Is that okay? Everybody good with that? Who's feeling uncomfortable? Who's feeling uncomfortable? Because we, and I use the royal we are uncomfortable talking about money, aren't we? Would you agree? Is that fair? Okay, which rule book is that in? Which rule book is it that we don't talk about money? It's not polite, it's not nice, is it? Which rule book is that in? It's not in a rule book. It's part of our culture, because we don't do that. We grew up being told that. I've worked in Japan and Germany. They've got no problem with talking about money. In fact, one of the first questions they'll ask you in a business, how much do you earn? What car do you drive? It's a culture. Boil it all down, it's the way we do things here. And in an HRB, we have to try and engender a safety culture. How do we do that in an HRB? How do we get people to think about safety? To feel like they're part of the conversation? Well, as I said earlier on, we are launching our conference, and you can see the flyer on the chairs here. We are launching this thing called the Fire Safety Mark. Now, if you go just over there, there's a wagon selling duck spring rolls. On the front of the wagon, you'll see a little green sticker, and it's got 5 on it for food hygiene. And everywhere you go in the UK now, a restaurant, a kebab shop, anywhere, if you went into a Michelin-star restaurant, wherever you live, probably on the door or somewhere there'll be a sticker and it'll say 1 to 5, and it'll talk about the food hygiene in that restaurant. What we want to do now is take that concept and put it into buildings. So when you walk into your building, what you'll see on the wall is one of these. Now, what does that mean? Well, would you want to be in a building that was 1 down here? Well, actually, 1 might be appropriate for a bed and breakfast. If it's a 50-story hotel, you'd probably like to think it would be 5. But at least as the consumer going into the building, the resident, you've got an easily accessible way of saying, what's the fire safety like in my building? Because if you show a tenant, and I mean this with no disrespect, or in any way trying to be patronising, are they really going to understand the significant findings of a fire risk assessment? Does it mean anything to them that you haven't got sufficient air changes in the underground car park? The battery life on the emergency lights is probably slightly out of spec. I mean, that's essential detail for us. But old Mrs. Jones on the 18th floor, really, she just wants to know she's safe, doesn't she? So please support this initiative. We are going to launch it. We are looking for early adopters. And then we've had a number of people where we've engaged with them and they said, oh yeah, we'll definitely do it, but we'll only do it in the buildings where we get a 5. We don't want to do it in the other buildings. Some buildings are not going to get to 5 HRBs. You can only get a 5 if you've got 2 staircases and if the building is sprinkled. So most buildings are not going to be a 5. There's a growth path there if you're going to retrofit, and we're now starting to see companies offering retrofit staircases. I saw there's a company called Evacstack who will come along and they'll put another staircase into your building and make it look like the original building. So these things are coming and they are changing. If you're interested in this, please come and see me. I left my card up the front here. We are looking for early adopters. I'm particularly interested in talking to fire risk assessors, because once you've done your fire risk assessment, you may then report back and give that fire risk assessment to your client. What I'm hoping now is, as well as doing that, you will then give them a fire mark to go in their building. And you can then say, well, actually, I've got you down as a 2 at the moment, but if you did this, this, and this, you'd actually get up to a 3. One other thing we're launching at our conference this year is we're calling for an International Stair Descend Day. So this will be a day in the year when you'll encourage and invite all of the residents to walk down the stairs if they can. Make it a charity event, do what you will. But time and again when I go into these blocks and I talk to people and I say, you know, the staircase, how many times? Well, the lift's broken all the time, so we have to use it quite a lot actually. But another place, in working buildings, you know, office and mixed-use buildings, you say to people, when was the last time you walked out? I've never walked down the stairs. I may have done when I've done a fire evacuation drill. So a fire strategy in a typical HRB. Here's a typical HRB. Single stair, it's got a firefighting lift, it's got a dry riser, 30 minutes fire resistance, and the normal emergency lights, and bits of signage, etc., yeah? Now, the way that I develop fire strategies is that they are a product of these 6 combining tactics: prevention, detection, escape, containment, which includes sprinklers, firefighting, and service continuity, i.e. rehousing people if they get dehoused. So, this is where you've got to put your money where your mouth is, all right? For you as an audience, I want you to think about that building and you get the chance to say which one of these is the most important. Which one of these is the most effective, in your opinion, as a tactic to that building, and just take it as a normal occupancy that you get an HRB. So, hands up, all those of you who think prevention is the most important tactic. About a third. How many of you think detection and alarm is the most important tactic? Nobody. Wow, okay. Provision of escape. How many of you think provision of escape is the most important one? 4 or 5. Containment. Active and passive containment, including sprinklers. How many people think that's the most important tactic? 2. Firefighting. Provision of firefighting equipment for firefighters. Nobody. And lastly, service continuity. What happens when you chuck people out in the street and they've got nowhere to go, and you have to then do it. Who thinks that's the most important tactic? One or two? So we've got a clear winner here, which is prevention. Never mind all this kit, B1 to B5 from ADB, never mind all that kit and stuff. You've just told me that the most important thing in that building is management. And that's what I believe anyway, certainly. I've done this exercise all over the world with residential buildings, and funnily enough, elsewhere, containment comes out as the most important. They've got very little faith in prevention. They say it's containment. If I've got sprinklers, then the problem goes away, effectively. Interesting, here in the UK, we go very strong on prevention. And yet, we've got no definable competency until very recently for people who manage fire safety in tall buildings. I can't tell you, when I train managers of tall buildings, and some very high-profile tall buildings, their level of knowledge and understanding of their buildings is, at best, rudimentary. You ask them, say, can you just briefly explain the cause and effect of the fire alarm system? Do you know the difference between a firefighter lift and a normal lift? Do you know what ventilation you've got in your underground car park? Do you know the difference between active and passive containment? I do hope that we are going to evolve a skill set within the managers who are going to be, whoever the building safety managers end up being called, or whatever they are. I suspect it's just going to be a set of duties, and somebody's going to drop on somebody's desk. That the competency will still go with that role. You should check all your assumptions in your building. And this is the kind of list that I believe you should sit down and work through. Was the building built and commissioned correctly? Talking to a fire brigade colleague I met here today, he listened to my talk earlier on. I'm not going to name which county it is. And he said, yeah, we've got some really good fire engineers now. We've sent them out into some of our existing HRBs. And he said, I can't tell you how bad it is. 80% of them, the smoke control system doesn't work. Wasn't commissioned correctly. So what is your building? Has it been built and commissioned correctly? Do you know what the building capacity is? Now, if you go to other places in the world, certainly in North America, you walk into restaurants and most tall buildings, there'll be a big sign on the wall saying this building is built for this many people. Do you know how many people your building was built for? Capacity-wise. Is it an issue? Well, it is an issue because we've got this new phenomenon known as cramming. We've got a cost of living crisis. Here in Birmingham or in London, you know, you're talking about very high costs to live in rented accommodation, certainly can't buy a property. Where are the people living who are sweeping the roads, making the sandwiches and the coffee? Where are they living? Well, I'll tell you what they're doing, they're adapting. And we're finding now apartments designed for 4 people with 30 people in. What does that do for me as a fire engineer when I size the staircases to get people out of the building, and it's designed on a notional occupancy of 800 and there's 2,500 people in there? So do you know the building capacity? And are you making it clear to the occupants? This building was built, designed on 4 to 6 people in an apartment with a total capacity of whatever it is. If we go above that, all my sums are wrong as a fire engineer. Normal fire load in each residential unit. So typically with design fires, we talk about 5 megawatts as the amount of stuff in the flat that can burn. What is 5 megawatts? A Golf GTI, a VW Golf GTI, if you set fire to it, will go off about 11 megawatts. So half a car, really. What happens when I get somebody in a flat who's a hoarder? You've got a 30-storey block, an 18-storey block or whatever, and on the second floor I've got a hoarder, and in their flat, and I've 2 to 5% of the nation's population has hoarding tendencies. And in worst cases, I've seen front doors opened, and there's a step ladder, and there's a gap between the ceiling of this, inside flats and apartments. Now, how much fire load is in that flat? It's not 5 megawatts, 25 megawatts. The building was not designed for it, let alone all the other problems that go with it, rat infestation and other stuff. So how do you know you've got a hoarder in the building? And what happens if they're a hoarder on the second floor of your HRB? They're putting everybody else's life at risk. What are you going to do about it? Well, generally, it's a long, protracted process of sorting out. And it's not just bring a load of skips and throw the crap out. It's a mental issue. It's a mental illness that has to be remedied. All contractors working on life safety equipment have to be competent. When you do your approved contractor lists for maintenance of fire detection systems, fire extinguishers, emergency lights, etc., what detail do you go down into to check that they're competent and that they don't then outsource it to a third party? Fire brigade access is unimpeded. Anybody here involved in Lakanal House in London? The fire in Lakanal House? One of the constant things I see when I read the reports, did you see the fire in Brooklyn in January, February, wasn't it? The fire in Brooklyn, where they've got the turntable ladders and they've pitched the turntable ladders, but they're so far away that when they came down, they could only reach the second floor. And that's because of the design of street furniture, trees, other stuff that's been put in, which actually means the fire brigade vehicles, it's not just access to the dry riser and a hydrant. You have to think about where they're going to park all their vehicles. For a high-rise incident now, because of what's happened, the fire brigade are going to throw the kitchen sink at any high-rise fire, so you could get 20, 30 fire engines turning up, plus all the other command vehicles and other paraphernalia that goes with it. Have you thought about it as a building safety manager? Can the ground take that weight? London have got a new, was it 68 metre turntable ladder? That weighs, I think it weighs 28, 30 tons. You know, do you know around your tall building, can it withstand 30 tons being put? Are there any culverts, soft areas, underground car parks, etc.? All that stuff needs to be thought through. Occupants can escape if they elect to do so. 1 in 5 of us has a disability. 1 in 4 in city centres and urban areas. So, although you're providing we're all working on the idea that a stay put strategy is the way to go. Can that person actually do that? You know, we are, as a society in the UK, we're getting older and we're getting fatter. And asking somebody, a bariatric person, somebody who's morbidly obese, to actually then evacuate is a big issue. In that one particular person I'm talking about. So can all those people in there? And the fire risk assessor that you're asking to do the fire risk assessment, I personally believe they've got to understand the profile of the occupants in the building. Because we're going back to that datum again. Or we're basing that as our datum. Well, it's not the right datum, in my opinion. Right, a question for all you guys. You're operating a stay put policy in your HRB, yeah? In the National Fire Chief Council's guidance, it says, if there is a fire in your building but not inside your home, then you are usually safer to stay in your flat unless the heat or smoke from the fire is affecting you. Right, what guidance are you going to give to the residents about when they should abandon stay put? Are you clear what you're telling people about when they should go? Is it when they see fire engines outside? Is it when they get a ping on their social media saying there's a fire in the building? Is it when they open the front door and they see smoke in the corridor? Are we clear on this? Is anybody clear on what advice we're giving to them? It's a mess, isn't it? Fire is affecting you. Does that mean anything? Doesn't, does it? Unless somebody's, I'm quite happy to be corrected here, folks. If somebody can give me a nice succinct way, we're going to tell old Mrs. Jones on the 18th floor about when she should abandon stay put. And we haven't. Human behaviour. Now, we've yet to see the full report from Brooklyn, but it looks to me as if certainly a significant number of the people that were killed in the Brooklyn fire and possibly also in the Grenfell fire, they died in means of escape. They died after leaving their flats. Now, I believe one of the reasons that we have to really question the validity now of stay put is this social media induced simultaneous evacuation. Supposing in your block of flats now you've got a WhatsApp group between all the residents, it's 3 o'clock in the morning, or even in the evening, and ping, your phone goes, it's Barry on the 7th floor, there's a really bad fire on the 5th floor. I can hear the fire engines coming now. Are you going to stay put? Human behaviour, do you think you're going to stay put? We've got to work through these issues now, and we've got to take into consideration human behaviour. Things are changing. And that's why we have to think about it. And you, as the managers in buildings, have to think these issues through as well. Otherwise, we can end up in a situation where if front doors are left open for whatever reason, and we've seen evidence of that in the fire in London last year, when the front door was left open, the fire, smoke percolated down the corridor, people were emerging out of their flats into smoke. Have we reached the time now where we should be issuing smoke hoods to residents? Anybody travelled in China in the room? I've travelled and worked in China quite a bit. Every hotel I stayed in China, when I opened the door and went to the minibar, because that's what you do, doesn't it? You go to the minibar, 2 smoke hoods and a torch. Every hotel I went in. Difference of approach, difference of consideration. Embracing resilience and redundancy. So I call this, just to try and illustrate this, and I use this when I'm doing project boards and I'm talking to people about how much you're going to invest in your building when you do the refurb or you do the building. And it goes like this. So we've got this triangle, this inverted triangle here, and we've got a sliding scale of resilience up the side here. And as you can see, the further we go up this particular triangle, the more redundancy we're going to build into the system. Does everybody get the concept okay? So let's apply first. The first level then is compliance with approved document B and the relevant codes in Scotland and Northern Ireland. That's our entry level. That's life safety only. Building can fall down. If it was a hospital, everybody gets their operations cancelled. Lots of environmental damage. But ADB is only based on life safety only. If we go a little bit further along there and you then build that building to the insurance requirements, and we used to have a version of ADB incorporating insurance requirements. It was a great document. It's been withdrawn now. I hope it comes back out again. But that gave a greater margin of fire safety in the building. And it would have attracted a more favourable insurance environment as well, if you're being insured, if you're worried about that. If we go a bit further up here and we then start to design the building based around business and service continuity, so that the building will withstand the foreseeable fires and will still be able to keep most of the people in the building and keep operating, you can see there it's a higher level of safety that's being asked for and required. And then if you get up to this level here, which the world's largest insurance company, FM Global, they call it their fully protected status. That means that you've put all the bells and whistles in the building. Definitely it's sprinkled. Your active and passive detection, the management systems are so comprehensive and so robust that they will give it what they call the fully protected status. And that's their best, you'll get their best insurance premium if you build the building to that. Now I believe as we go up this scale here of resilience, you're building in levels of redundancy. Supposing I've got my HRB and I've got one firefighting lift in that HRB. What happens when that firefighting lift goes out of action? Does that happen very much? Yeah, it does actually. Happens quite a bit. What do we then do? The fire crews that are coming there, they've then got to make a decision. Are they going to use the normal accommodation lift if there's another lift? No, they're going to use the stairs, and there's only one staircase. Where are the people coming down the stairs? Sorry, where are the people going who are going to evacuate? I think we have to say to ourselves, let's build buildings that are resilient and they've got redundancy built in. It's going to cost more money. Shock, who knew? And this brings me to, I suppose, my point here, and it is a bit political, and I'm calling this the cost of living, because colleagues of mine who are thought leaders in our industry are now saying that we have overreacted with Grenfell. we are now coming out with things which are disproportionate. And we should be adopting the principles of reasonably practicable. Reasonably practical, those of you from a health and safety background, is where in a health and safety environment we can take into account the time, money and effort and disruption before we do a safety thing. It's where you have a set of scales and you balance them on it. I don't think we've really, and you'll now see with the new building safety regulator, that this is going to come into our industry, the fire industry, a lot more than it has done in the past. Because you're going to be asked, if you say, let's retrofit sprinklers into our HRB, it hasn't got sprinklers, so let's go through that project. And there are many case studies of how easy that is to do, and it costs about the same as recarpeting the whole block, actually, to fit sprinklers. Is it reasonably practicable to do that? Now, word of caution. Well, as soon as you start using this argument, you're probably not going to get the money for it. Now, Grenfell, the cost so far. With the 2 tranches of money that the government has put into this, they're saying that actually into the fund for the limited number of buildings we're talking about is about £9 billion pounds. The HSC used to have a document called the cost of accidents, and they would say that there's a ratio of direct costs to indirect costs with accidents, and that at the time they said it was about 36 to 1. If you take that as a rough concept, that would give us a bill for being complacent for the last 20 years of about £320 billion now to correct that complacency. That's more than the budget for the NHS. I am finishing on a bit of a political note. What I'm trying to say to you is if you get the possibility to build your buildings and go further than what ADB is asking for, because the bar is so low with ADB. It is so low. Take it further, take it higher. And the way that you can complement that design intent is with really robust, competent managers of the building who understand the building, they understand the construction, they understand the fire safety systems, and they understand what they need to do to keep the building safe. They know how to engage with the tenants.